presents a family in which the intergenerational ghosts of loss are hiding behind the symptoms of the present. Kathleen Rogers, the second wife of David Rogers, not their real names, made the initial appointment for her family. The guidance counselor of her stepdaughter Michelle had referred them to me because Michelle had been cutting school and generally acting remote and upset. You must be Michelle. Mm-hmm. Hi. So we spoke on the phone. What I'd like to do is hear a little from each of you what you see as the problem, and then I'm going to ask you some questions. We'll try to put it in some context. That's okay. So whoever wants to go first.
I guess I'll begin. Well, I think you know that you were recommended to us by Michelle's guidance counselor. She's been having some difficulty at school. There have been several incidents this year. The last one was her getting caught cutting classes. Additionally, we're very concerned about the group of kids that she's been hanging out with. There's sort of a fast crowd. We're never quite sure where she is and so forth. Also, she seems to have this big chip on her shoulder, a lot of anger and hostility, and we're really not sure how to deal with it. And that's principally it.
Okay. So Kathleen, what's your view?
Well, I agree. I mean, there's just a lot of tension in the household, and it's not very pleasant to live like that. And I mean, I've tried to help her deal with her anger.
Something about this family's presentation seems very flat. I'll take the guidance counselor's referral as an indication there's something wrong, but so far, all I've heard is a description of a typical teenager. What's your sense? What she's maybe angry about?
I don't know.
Okay. So, what's your view, Michelle? Would you agree that there's a lot of tension in the family?
Guess so.
Yeah. Are there some things about what's happening at home that are upsetting you? Want to talk about it? No. How about school? You're okay with school, the way things are going?
School's fine.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. So is there anything that you think would be good for us to change about the way things are going from your point of view?
I wouldn't be so angry if they weren't so.
So what?
So wrapped up in their own like little world. Everything has to be just so. Everything is the baby this or the baby that. The baby needs this.
And how old is the baby?
She just turned 2.
That's 2. I see. You're saying what? That the family revolves around the baby?
Seems so.
I see. So have things changed since the baby came? Since the baby's been born?
Yeah. So that's the only child in the house.
Well, you know what? Maybe what would be good, if it's okay with you, is let me get a little background and ask a little bit so I kind of know who's who. And I like to do a genogram very early in the first session so that as I listen to details of the presenting problem, I have a context in which to put them. Now, you were married before, and you have an older brother. Is that
Julian,
And how old is he?
21.
He's 21. And Michelle, you're 15? What's your birth date again?
November 5th, 1979.
Okay. And your first wife's name?
Diane.
Diane. She died when?
She died August 15th, 1991.
No, I'll come back to her. But let me understand now. The two of you were married when?
June 10th, 1992.
Okay. And you together have a daughter?
Jade.
Okay. And she was born when?
Excuse me just a second. Is this really necessary for us to go into all these dates? I mean, it seems like we're here because of Michelle's problem, and I'm just wondering whether we're, whether we can use time a little better.
Right. Well, I'll tell you, from my perspective, you never know what part of the history may turn out to be relevant to the presenting problem. But very specifically, what your daughter said was that she's been upset since Jade was born. Now that may, I don't know exactly what that means, but surely the specific time when she was born would make some difference in that you must have had to do a lot of family rearranging around her birth, no? Okay. And Julian, by the way, where is he?
He's at Colorado College.
And he's what year? He's been away for how long?
He's 21.
He's 21, but how many years has he been away
He's a
from?
junior.
He's a junior. Now, let me get a little bit about your background. How many were in your family that you grew up in?
Well, I just me, my mother and father.
I see that you had no brothers or sisters?
No.
Really? They didn't want to have any other children? Do you know anything about that?
Well, there was actually a child born before me, about 2
Really?
years before me.
Asking why a person was an only child can sometimes uncover important family history. With a son or a daughter?
Son. And he was born with only a partially formed stomach, and so he couldn't take in nutrients. And
What was his name?
David.
The fact that he was given the same name as his dead brother suggested that he may have been a replacement child for his parents. And everything kind of, I don't know, spooky or something? They had the same name as
Not
your
really
brother?
why.
Although David makes light of this, I wonder if it intensified his role as an only child. Now, is your father alive?
No.
When did he die?
He died December 30th, 1977.
What did he do for work?
Banker.
And how did he die?
Well, complications due to liver disease.
Really? Was he a drinker?
Well, he certainly wasn't an alcoholic, but he enjoyed drinking.
Asking about the cause of death, especially if it was premature, can sometimes reveal problems such as alcoholism or suicide.
But
I know this is sort of hard to talk about sometimes, different things in your family, but did anybody else ever think that he had an alcohol problem?
no,
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 not your mother, for example.
no.
Really. Although David rejects the suggestion of alcoholism, I'm not totally convinced. I may revisit this question once we've established a greater level of trust. Now, is your mother alive?
No.
When did she die?
She died in 87.
And how old was she?
She was, I think she was 65.
What was her name?
Edith.
So they never had any other children? Your parents? There were no miscarriages or anything?
Yeah, there were a couple, I think, in my early childhood.
Really?
Mid-50s, 54, 55, something like that.
Hmm.
I guess they wanted one more child, and didn't happen.
I see. I ask about miscarriages and stillbirths because these losses are often glossed over with little resolution and can be more important than anyone realizes. So now, can we talk a little bit about your family? Sure. Yes. I appreciate you may not know exactly where I'm going with this, but to me, it's really important to kind of get a sense of who people are and where they're coming from. So how many are in your family?
There's myself and I have a half brother named Matthew. My parents are divorced.
In contrast to David's rather flat description of his family, Kathleen was actively uncomfortable talking about her working class Irish-German background. The first in her family to attend college, she quit after her second year when her father died unexpectedly. She has very little contact with her mother, stepfather, and half-brother, who moved to Florida shortly after the second marriage. What's your family background ethnically?
Ethnically,
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't have an ethnic background.
Where did your ancestors come from? Do you know?
England.
I believe strongly that people's cultural background plays a profound role in how they see the world and how they define their problems. I try always to help them locate themselves in this context, since our society tries so hard to pretend that culture, like race, gender, class, and sexual orientation, doesn't matter, when in fact, these dimensions structure our very existence.
I'm a wasp. I'm white bread with the crust removed.
And where'd you grow up?
Westport,
Mhm.
Connecticut.
Uh-huh. Were you pretty close to your parents?
Reasonably so.
Mhm. Who were you closer to?
My mother, I guess.
Really? How would you describe your childhood in a word?
Well, I just describe it as a pretty happy, upper middle class, family.
Yeah. Mhm. Okay. David seems to have little sense of himself as an emotional being. I wonder if this is just a result of his upper middle class WASP background, or if something else is inhibiting him. So is Matthew married?
No.
Does he have any kids?
Yes.
How many kids?
One.
Mm-hmm. How old?
I think he's 3.
And where does he live?
He lives in Florida.
Mm-hmm. What's his name?
Ethan, I think.
You're not in touch with him?
No.
Cutoffs such as this usually indicate something seriously amiss in the family process. I'll explore this later with Kathleen, hoping to encourage her to reconnect. Let me go back a little bit now and ask about your mother. Now, her name was Diane, and you mentioned before she died in August of 91.
Mhm.
Now, tell me a little bit about her background. What was her?
She grew up in Puerto Rico.
So, you look like you like that. Do you? Mm-hmm. You think of yourself as part Puerto Rican?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
I am, aren't
you sure are. But that's important to you, that part of your identity?
I? Yeah.
Uh-huh. This was the first sign of life in the session, and I went right towards it. I was also very interested in the Puerto Rican connection, since this choice of a wife seemed so out of character for David. Have you ever been to Puerto Rico? Mm-hmm. Really? Tell me about that.
I went a couple of times during the summer.
Really? Just your whole family went, or what?
No, just me.
Really? How did that happen?
Well, the first time was, just to visit family and stuff, and then after that, my mom got sick, and my parents didn't think that it was the best idea for me to stick around, so they sent me down there.
Now, how old were you when your mother got sick?
10, 11.
So you said you had family down there. Who's down there?
My grandmother was down there. I used to go visit and stay with her, but I also have cousins and
Really?
aunts and uncles.
What's your grandmother's name?
Abba. That's what I called her anyway.
Carmen, her name is Carmen.
Okay. So she's still in Puerto Rico?
Yeah, but buried.
You mean she died?
Mhm.
Really? How long ago?
3 months ago, February
Really?
15th.
Were you close to her?
Mhm.
Really? How did she die?
She was done.
Really? How old was she?
Mhm.
She'd been sick for many years. She had Alzheimer's disease.
No matter how many genograms I do, I'm still amazed at the hidden family issues this technique reveals. But when you were younger, during the time your mother was ill, you were very close to her?
Mhm.
What was your wife's illness?
Well, she had a kind of leukemia.
Okay.
And so in the beginning, there was a lot of chemotherapy.
Really?
And during that period of time, first year of her illness, she would have periods where she was sort of okay.
Mm-hmm.
But the second year, it got very bad.
So you felt maybe it would be easier if Michelle were.
Away from it.
David seemed to be going along with this painful discussion of his wife's death, so I was unprepared for his reaction to what I thought was a rather innocuous question about Michelle's grandmother. So it sounds like you were very close to your grandmother, didn't you?
Excuse me, Mom. I really have to ask the question again where this is leading. I mean, now we've really wasted most of this session going back on this ancient history, and what I'm really afraid of is that we're not going to focus on the problem that we came in here to address, which is Michelle's misbehavior. And I'm very concerned that she's going to take this as a cue that this is some sort of an excuse.
Was there something about that got, I don't know.
No, it's just that she really wasn't very close to her grandmother. That's the point of fact. And I just am afraid that if we just keep harping on this stuff here, we're not going to deal with what's going on with Michelle at school.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I really feel like if we're going to go on with this, I need to know how long this is going to take. And I mean, I'm a lawyer and I work with contracts, and I have, we have to tell clients, we have to tell them, how long something's going to take and what it's going to cost.
Mm-hmm. Well, in some ways, this is a little bit different situation, that it's very hard until I get a sense of what the story is to know how to exactly help you to figure.
Can you give us some ballpark figure?
Sure. And I feel very strongly about being accountable to you. So you're going to have to feel okay with the process. In a general way, that's going to take us a few sessions. What I would say is if after we've met 3 or 4 times, you feel as you do now that this is, what does this have to do with anything? Then I would say, let's really talk about it. But until we get a sense of what the history is and how that may relate to whatever's happening right now, both in your family and for her at school, I kind of need to get oriented to this.
All right. Well, I think we have to think about it.
Dear, I think we should do it. All right.
Well, let's give it another try.
Okay. All right. But keep letting me know if this is not, you know. Now, how are you with this idea? What do you think about coming?
Beats being grounded.
In the first session, we dealt primarily with the new nuclear family and the previous nuclear family, as well as with all three families of origin. We'll focus on specific relationships as therapy continues. My hypothesis at this point is that David never really mourned the loss of his first wife and rushed into a second marriage. I suspect that Michelle has not gotten over her mother's death and does not feel a part of the new family. Perhaps that pain is resurfacing for her, triggered by her grandmother's death. I also suspect that Kathleen has helped David in the cover-up of his losses, a typical female task of protecting the husband and children. The first challenge here is to get David and Michelle to mourn Diane. I'm also concerned that Kathleen's role as caretaker will put her at risk for depression down the road. So, thanks.
Monica, I've been thinking a lot about last week, and I still feel that it's important that we focus on the present and not so much on the past. I mean, we spent a good deal of the session last week, as an example, talking about Michelle's grandmother, who Michelle saw for all of about 4 months total in her entire life. And I really think we need to focus on the present and Michelle's behavior, which is continuing to be very difficult.
I have to tell you that from my perspective, the past really influenced the present in such important ways that we cannot not deal with that. I haven't been able to forge a connection with David yet, so I don't have a strong enough footing to confront his resistance. Instead, I'll go with his concerns and look for ways to connect them with the family history that seems to be the cause of their current distress. But I'll tell you what, let's start with what's happening now that, you know, obviously there's something that you wanted me to understand that you think I don't yet understand. So why don't you tell me what that is?
May I?
Go ahead, go ahead.
Thank you. Well, this past week, Michelle has been listening to this new rap music that goes thug, thug or something, and it pounds continually. I think it's these kids that she's hanging out with that are.
Note how Kathleen jumps in to protect David from having to express his feelings. It may be that he's so disconnected from the family that he doesn't really know what the trouble is.
Kathleen really gets the brunt of it because I'm, at work all day and I come home late and, I hear these tales and it's.
Well, I'm not really clear. What is it exactly that bothers you? The music bothers you and what they wear bothers you. There's something here that just doesn't wash. When parents make superficial criticisms of their children's friends, I often find it's a code for class or culture.
They're from an area that I think is really bad for Michelle to go down to.
We just
I don't feel, I just don't feel that she's safe with these kids.
Now, is it, I know you're relatively new to the situation, but is it your sense that Michelle has changed the friends she hangs out with? That she used to have a different group of friends?
No, they're Black and Puerto Rican kids. That's what they don't
No,
like.
that's not it at all.
Yeah.
It's their behavior. It's got nothing to do with their color or race or anything. Okay.
Michelle, I grew up with Blacks and Puerto Ricans. I'm used to them. No, it's not what they are, it's what they are doing that we're upset about.
I mean, these
And we're
kids-
concerned.
And learn a little bit about your friends. What they're like.
I met them at the summer theater group that I was in last year. And they're all into just, really cool stuff.
Really? Like what?
Carlos writes poetry. He writes some good stuff too. It's really, really deep. And And Serena's in this Latin folk band, and they mix a lot of different kinds of music on it.
Do you kind of feel connected to them in some way because it's like part of your heritage we were talking about last time?
Yeah, they know where I'm coming from, you know,
Mhm.
my people.
Hmm. So what do you think about your father and Kathleen's concerns about that? I mean, obviously they care about you and they care where you're going. And it sounds like they're really worried about it. Your connection to these friends. Should they be?
Concerned? I would think that they would want me to be happy. Hanging out with them makes me happy.
I'm reframing the parents' criticism as concern to see if Michelle sees any validity at all in their comments.
But I'm not happy that Selena just got a tattoo. And that you think that's very cool.
It's one of those that like washes off in 2 weeks.
Adolescents generally don't reveal themselves in front of their parents, so I met with Michelle alone to get to know her better. I thought it'd be a good idea for us to get to talk alone a little bit because I'm not really sure what's happening here with your parents. I talked to your guidance counselor and she says, you know, she's known you, she thinks you're basically a terrific kid, but you've really been different the past couple of months. So she was sort of worried about it. That's what she said, why she referred you. And I don't know what you think about that. I mean, you think she should be worried?
I mean, I'm not really doing anything, you know, major. Yeah, I cut a couple of classes here and there, and yeah, you know.
But from what she told me, it's different. Because she said, you know, you've always been a good student. You've been really hassling some of your teachers, cutting in ways that you never did before. And her sense is something's happening. Your parents' fantasies are obviously going wild. I think it comes from really caring about you. So you need to know that.
I mean, I know that you know, a major thing that we're in conflict with is that they don't like the friends that I've been hanging out with lately. But you know, they think that they just assume that just because, you know, they're black and they're Puerto Rican, that they're doing all these things like that, you know, that's all that we see in the media and TV and stuff. And it's not like that, you know, they're really cool kids, and you know, there's so many things that I can do with them that, you know, none of my other friends in the past ever really could understand or could. I feel like I can relate to some of them in ways I was never able to relate with anybody else.
So you feel like you share interests, like you were talking about Carlos and writing poems and
Yeah,
your other friend,
yeah,
Serena.
Serena.
So why do your parents, do you think that these kids are going nowhere? Do they know these kids?
No, they haven't even given them a chance.
Really?
They're just going to listen to what, you know, other parents are saying or whatever, just because they're not from the same neighborhood. Right away, that means that there's something wrong with them.
Mm-hmm. But I mean, you can understand yourself that, because you must see it with other kids, that it's easy to get in with the wrong crowd. It's easy to get into a situation where peer pressure can
Yeah, but that's not
become a
me.
real problem.
That's not me.
Okay, well, I'm just asking because I don't know you, you know. Her reaction here seems pretty genuine. I don't think that her new friends are the problem. And because it sounds like there has been a recent change, and that's what I'm trying to figure out is what happened recently. I mean, I know last time you were saying that at home, the focus seems to be on the baby. But the babies too, not, I mean, that's not that recent. What do you think is upsetting your parents so much now?
Just how I'm hanging out with Puerto Rican kids.
Why? Why is that so upsetting to them?
I don't know why it's so upsetting to them, but you saw yourself. I mean, when my father was talking about my grandmother, it was like she was a non-person.
He doesn't know how connected you were to her?
What did it sound like?
No, I mean, that's true, but I don't know, I couldn't really tell what that was about. Have you ever talked to him about what that means to you?
No. He wouldn't understand. He wouldn't get it.
Really? Do you miss your mother?
I miss my mother. Yeah.
Was there something that was triggered when your grandmother died?
My father like wants to ignore that it even like had any relevance in my life.
Mm-hmm.
But I was with my grandmother when I found out about my mother dying.
Mm-hmm.
She was the one that was there for me, not my father. And it should have been him.
Have you ever talked to him about that?
He wouldn't. No.
He wouldn't what?
It's like he's not there.
Okay, but maybe that's the issue. I mean, maybe, maybe you and he just need to get connected in a way that has really been missing for you. I don't know. That's what it sounds like. That he doesn't know where you've been at.
He doesn't even take the time to try and find out either. So how can he know?
This is a real break. So far, I haven't seen any way to get David to deal with his grief. Michelle needs to confront him about his being shut down with her. If David sees that this is hurting their relationship, it may motivate him to face up to his own unresolved mourning. I think maybe we need to talk about this and that some of his resistance about the relevance of your history, you can tell him about. I mean, I can't, he's not going to hear it from me, but he's going to hear it from you, and he's going to know that that's what's relevant. Because that's history that you and he share,
But he's not even want to talk about it.
Well, maybe it's time to talk about it.
And you heard him when he was here. He was saying, why are we even talking about stuff that has to do with the past?
Okay, but you can help him to understand that. And I'll help you. Because of the uneven power relationship between Michelle and her father, I wanted to make it very clear that I would lend my support to her attempt to discuss their shared history. While we were alone, I also checked about her use of drugs and alcohol and felt reasonably confident that this was not a problem. I then met with David and Kathleen to give them my assessment of Michelle. It's clear to me that she feels not as well connected to you, that she cannot really talk to you, that she has not talked to you. She said that she's never been able to talk to you about her mother's death. When you say to me, let's forget the history, we got to deal with this present problem, the sense I have is that the present problem is related to the history, and the fact that you and she cannot share the history matters. And I think we need to just talk to her about it. This is David and Michelle's history before Kathleen's time. I want her to stay out of the discussion, but I want her to be present for two reasons. It's history she should know about, and I don't want her to feel excluded from the therapy. I think this relates to a history that's before your time. If you were God, I don't think you could get it right with Michelle until she feels better connected to her father and better able to deal with the loss of her mother. So I think that some of what you're very irritated about with her in terms, I mean, some of it is just being a teenager, let's face it. But some of it is that she is struggling to put together a history that was before your time, you know? And I think she needs to work it out with her father. And that it's not your problem. You know what I mean? Do you remember how you first found out that she was ill?
She called me and Julian into her bedroom.
Your father wasn't there?
And he was working.
Really? And what did she say?
She just said that she was mommy sick and not to worry, that everything was going to be fine. But you know, if she wasn't able to do some of the things that she, you know, sometime in the near future, that
Have you ever talked to your father about this?
You know, I was concerned about, you know, upsetting them too much. I thought that it might actually be counterproductive in terms of Diane's well-being.
Before you made reference to how hard it was. She had a lot of pain in the last period.
She lost a great deal of weight, and do we really have to talk about this?
You know, I think it matters a lot for you and your daughter to share. I know that it's hard.
She lost a great deal of weight.
Are you okay with that? Do you see why it matters for her?
She, in the end, she was in the hospital for about 3 months total. And she gradually became weaker. And of course, she was connected up to IV most of the time.
Now, you said before, Michelle, that you had actually been with your grandmother at the time your mother actually died. How did that happen?
well, they sent me to Puerto Rico. So I was down there when I found out that she died.
Really? How long have you been there?
I was at that point I was probably there already for almost 2 months, month and a half.
Do you remember when you found out that she had died?
I feel like it was yesterday.
Really? What do you remember? I often find that asking a client to recall specific details of a painful event elicits a more genuine emotional response.
I was in Ava's kitchen and I was cutting up the peppers for the sofrito because she was gonna make some rice and beans. And the phone rang in the living room. But I could see her. No, it's like the kitchen and then there was the living room.
Mhm.
And I think I almost knew even when the phone rang, but she picked up the phone and she stood there. And she just she dropped the phone and she started screaming, oh my God, not my baby. Not my baby. Not you.
I find it's very important to give people the time to work through moments like this. And then what? Did you and your grandmother come up together for the funeral, or how did that happen?
I stayed down there.
What do you mean you stayed down there?
My father called me later on that day and said, oh, he said you might as well just stay the month and wait till your flight at the end of the month to come home.
See, I thought that I gave some thought to whether she should come back for the funeral, and for a while I thought that would be a good idea, but then after thinking about it some more, I thought, well, she's going to be hanging around a funeral home for a few hours and going through all that.
Can I ask you, what are you feeling now about this? I didn't want David to distance himself from these feelings, so I tried to bring him back into the moment. His response came as a complete surprise.
I really had no idea, Michelle, that you felt so strongly.
She was my mother.
Not about your mother, of course, but the whole thing with your grandmother. I had somehow put that behind me, and it seems so long ago. And I feel very guilty that I didn't tell you about your grandmother's death.
What do you mean?
Well, I frankly, I just didn't think it was important at the time.
I don't know what you didn't know your grandmother died?
I sort of found out.
What do you mean?
Well, there was this phone message, apparently, that Alicia, my wife's sister, called from Puerto Rico telling us about Carmen's death. And
And I came home from school and heard it.
Now this is just recently, right? This is just a few months ago.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
I came home from school. I heard it.
Yeah.
And I just went to my room. And then Kathleen came home later on and she played the messages. And I heard her play the messages. And I expected that afterwards she was gonna, come say something to me or come to my room.
it wasn't her fault. She
And
talked to me about it.
Nobody said nothing.
So when did you talk to her?
We did.
Well, I was so busy that week, and I just thought I thought about Carmen as someone that Michelle had very little, connection with anymore. We don't talk about Carmen, and I remembered it later in the week, and we did talk briefly about it then.
We talked about it. You said, oh, by the way, you remember Carmen from Puerto Rico? Well, she died.
I
We really
understand.
talked about it. He said, yeah, thanks for telling me.
So the two of you really never talked about any of this, it sounds like. I was impressed, and I have to say astonished, at how much David seemed to be connecting with his daughter and her emotional experience. You can never be too sure you know how another person will react. I would have thought it would have taken a lot more for David to open up like that. I mean, this is making me think that maybe some of what's gotten you upset, Michelle, the past few months is really that Carmen's death just kind of brought this whole thing back. And that maybe the lack of connection between the two of you is just, you know, it's just gotten too big. And that you really, I mean, she really needs you, obviously. And maybe some of what you've said about your Puerto Rican friends is a part of, you know, something very natural, really. That you didn't get to have your mother as long as you needed her. And so it's part of finding out who you are, you know. What did your mother do? I mean, did she work or something?
She used to write plays.
Actually, Diane and I met when I was in graduate school. I was a bit of a rebel in those days, and she was in a writing program at Columbia, and
Really?
yeah, and she wrote this political piece that I got involved in.
No kidding.
I did a couple plays back then.
Really?
Yeah.
You don't seem like the type, if you don't mind my saying so. You were in plays, Dad?
Yeah, I did a couple plays.
Go figure. When people disconnect because of the pain of their losses, they often bury important parts of themselves as well. Well, you know, I think this is really important that there's a lot that matters to share, you know, that we all carry our history with us, you know. And that probably there is a lot of what you know about Diane that matters. Now, let me ask you something. I'm very conscious that Julian is not here, you know, and of course he's a part of this history too. When is there some possibility that we could get him in too?
I don't think that's possible. He's in Colorado, so.
See, to me, this is the same point. Just as she needs you to be her father, maybe this is important for him too. She needs her brother, and he needs to be a part of this, you know, with his mother too.
I suppose that's a very expensive weekend.
But it's a very valuable family, isn't it? A part of you knows this is really crucial, but I still think it really matters, you know? Focusing on David and Michelle's shared memories of Diane would, of course, disrupt the new family balance.
She's 15 years old.
I think Michelle's staying out until 3 a.m. and David's withdrawing are reactions to last week's session. But not surprisingly, it's Kathleen who acts as the lightning rod.
Ask me, excuse me, I'm sorry, that concert is not as important as this family. And even though I am not part of the original family, I seem to be the only one that's taking that as the priority instead of the two of you who has your brother.
How is babysitting for Jade?
Because I was going shopping to get ready.
Michelle, you acted very irresponsibly. All right?
Oh, David, you sound like a priest.
Oh, come on, come on.
I know you're upset.
No.
I know you're upset. And I know you've been trying to solve this. We talked about it since before you guys came here.
You know, excuse me, why do I feel all of a sudden that I am being picked on? I am the mother now in charge.
You
I
know-
mean, the
you
other
know why
mother
I
is
think-
gone.
You know
Not
what
my
I-
mother, okay? Excuse me, I'm not your mother, but
Excuse me
I'm
a
your
sec.
stepmother.
Kathleen, you know what I think? I think you've been trying to solve a problem that you can't solve, which is you're the one who's on the line because you're the one there. You know, it's like you're in the role of mother and mothers are expected to take care of their children. But as we discussed before, you're not the mother. You don't have the leverage here and you can't do it.
But you're not getting David to do anything about it.
I'm doing
Things
the
are
act-
getting worse, not
I
getting
am doing
better.
the absolute best I can right now, all right?
My priority here was to get David to make a firm commitment to his parenting responsibilities. But first, I wanted to talk with Michelle to make sure that her staying out late wasn't a sign of more serious trouble. After seeing her alone for a few minutes, I met with David and Kathleen. Listen, I think we need to get this whole situation into some kind of perspective. You know, if you think about Michelle in terms of what's happening, she really is a good kid. You know, there is a lot to worry about. And she's like terrific, actually. When I'm trying to get a parent to change behavior towards a child, I don't want the child present because I don't want the parent to lose face. Let me just finish my thought here. For her to stay out until 3 o'clock by herself is serious because whatever kind of a good kid she is, it's dangerous. So believe me, I'm not saying, hey, yo, let her decide her own curfew. That's fine. I'm not saying that at all. She needs to know from you that you really mean it, that you're going to know when she doesn't come in at 11 o'clock at night, that you really mean it when you say call. No ifs, ands, or buts, and that there really are consequences. She loves you. She needs you. And I don't think you really get that. And honestly, that's why I think you're flipping out about this. Because I think emotionally, you're much more in touch with the real dangers, with what's really going on with teenagers, with what's really going on around, and that you're the one who's going to be able to reassure her, not me, by making sure you really follow through.
You know, I think I understand you, but I just feel like I can only do this within limits. I mean, I feel in some ways that I'm being drawn and quartered because I have a very, very stressful job right now. And
But you can't just do it to a certain extent. Because Kathleen is right. She could be lost if you do not connect with her. She could well get lost. She's not lost now. She's terrific. I'm saying this because I'm trying to really get through to you, but I don't think you understand this. The fact that she connected with me as well as she has in so few sessions is remarkable. She is really seeking to be connected. But you got to take the opportunity. She really needs you. She needs you to do more than just sort of when you're around, sort of say half-heartedly, you're grounded or something.
I'm under a lot of pressure too. You know, it's when you think about what's happened over the last 4 years, you're talking about the death of a wife, you're talking about remarried, we've just had another child.
But what are you saying, really? Where are you going to go? You know, she's 15. At 18, she's going to be gone. You have 3 years, and she's going to be gone. You can either do it or not do it. Those are the only two options that I can see. Some therapists would take exception to my urging David like this, but I've found that many clients are receptive to this kind of direct verbal intervention.
Well, all I can say is I can try to do it to the best of my ability. That's all I can say.
You know, work is a good excuse. And it's also, frankly, an excuse that a lot of men use to avoid very painful things that men in our society are not socialized to be able to deal with easily. You can use that. I'm urging you to think about doing it a different way. And I think you can do it. I was actually very struck at how emotionally present you were last week. When you were able to recognize what not dealing with Carmen meant for your daughter, I was really astonished actually at your being able to be that in touch with her emotionally to realize that. But it matters.
It was very upsetting to me because I thought we were making some progress.
What I actually think happened this week, which it's very common to have, people begin to move with something that's important and then they get scared and back off. what I think happened is, for what reasons, I'm not sure, something triggered Michelle to do something which it is worse than any of the acting out we've talked about before. I suspect it's in reaction to what happened here last week, that she somehow got scared. Now, what reason? I don't exactly know. But I think it's very much in relation to what we were talking about. That she really needs to deal with who her mother was for her, that a lot of who she is tied up with all of that history that she's got to be able to deal with. Can we talk about the period when your mother was ill? Julian came from Colorado for the next session. He was understandably uncomfortable, especially when talking about his mother's death.
I know she's really sick, very, very sick. In and out of the hospital.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, we were alone a lot of the time. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
you know.
Do you remember when she died?
Mm-hmm.
Well, where were you? How did you find out?
This our lady, you know, sort of took care of the house and everything. Jackie,
So your father called her or something?
I guess. Yeah.
I called Jackie, and she was at the house, and I told her to tell Julian and that I would be home as soon as possible.
Mm-hmm. And do you remember what happened when you saw Julian?
I don't remember that.
You said before, Julian, that you've never discussed a lot of this with him and you don't know what his feelings were. Are there things you'd like to know that you'd like to ask him about?
Yeah. You know, I think it's I just want to know. You know, you never communicated anything to us. I mean, it's like, even when we were kids, I mean, I know you were there, but I never felt like you really were there.
Bringing young adult children who have left home into therapy can be very powerful, giving them a safe place to express difficult feelings.
You know, I mean, I love you because you're my father. You know? And sometimes I just think, I don't know, did you really? I mean, I know you loved us, but like when we were burdened to you, did we? No. Did we? What? You know, do I make you proud of who I am? You know, I mean, sometimes I just don't know what to think anymore. I mean, I know you love mom, but God, you remarried so quickly. I mean, it's all these things. I just don't understand it. You know, and it's like, I want to come home, but I don't want to come home. I don't feel comfortable in my own house. I don't know.
Note how effectively these thoughts coming from Julian get through David's defenses. I could work with David for weeks without eliciting such a deep response.
I'm sorry. I don't mean to make you feel bad or anything, but
Trying to express it.
Of course I love you. I feel like you're talking about someone else. I mean, I hear what you're saying. Some of it must be true. But I feel like you're talking about someone else.
Of course, I love you both. Right, that. I know you love us, man. I mean, I don't know, what do you think? I mean,
For the rest of the session, David and his children shared memories of Diane and of her death. I mean, I think that's one of the worst things you could ever go through is to lose your spouse and have young
Certainly worse than
children.
I ever had.
Shared rituals can help reinforce family connectedness. This was especially important in this case because Michelle hadn't even been at her mother's funeral. But you know what I'm thinking? That you never talked about this. I mean, we're saying that you've never shared it. But also, the fact that Michelle wasn't even here when you had the funeral. Maybe, even though that's that many years ago, it would help if you would take your children to the grave now.
I think that would be helpful.
yeah.
You know what, David? I think he's been left too responsible here. That maybe it's not for him to have to decide if it would be helpful. Maybe it's for you to decide if it would be helpful. You know what I mean? Because he was the kid. I'm saying this because
Right,
I think they need you to be their father more than you realize.
right. So tomorrow. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
It wasn't surprising that things kept coming up all weekend that prevented the visit to Diane's grave, but they did finally manage the trip just before Julian left. It had a considerable impact on both father and daughter. Michelle was more connected to her parents, and she even joked with Kathleen. David was quite moved by the experience, and he also remarked on how shut down he felt and expressed a desire to be more open for the sake of his children. Tell me something. I several times wondered,
Yeah.
how did your family feel when you got together with Diane? I can't imagine they were too enthusiastic. I decided to meet with David and Kathleen alone to work on David's emotional distance.
What do you mean?
I mean, you know, you've described yourself as coming from this sort of somewhat upper class, old New England,
Waspy.
waspy
Mhm.
family. I can't imagine they would be too enthusiastic about your marrying somebody who was Puerto Rican. Was that an issue?
Well, what you have to understand about my parents is that they were very polite people.
Yes.
They did not.
David, we're trying to go a little underneath that, the
Okay.
politeness. We know they were polite. You're polite.
Right. Well, there was a problem.
At this point, I felt I had enough bond with David to push him a little, especially since he's asking me to help him penetrate his defenses. So let's talk about it. How did they react?
Well, they really didn't approve of Diane.
Really? How did the wedding go?
Well, I have very mixed feelings about the wedding because it wasn't exactly the wedding that she had in mind.
Really?
I never had thought much about exactly how I wanted to get married, but she really sort of wanted the traditional, wedding with a big white gown and
Mhm.
the church and the whole 9 yards.
Mhm.
And she really, her mother couldn't have afforded that. And my parents weren't, particularly forthcoming with support. And they.
So you didn't do that?
No, what we did is we did sort of a justice of the peace, thing. And we had a nice little dinner afterwards. And it was just us and 4 of our friends.
Really?
Mhm.
So your parents really disapproved?
Right. Again, it was nothing stated overtly. There were no confrontations. They never actually point blank said, "We don't want you to marry this woman." But there was no support.
Note how utterly understated David is here. He describes his parents as polite and says they weren't particularly forthcoming with support, when the truth is they didn't even attend their only child's wedding. But let me push another side of this, because we've talked about the kind of sense of deadness that sometimes comes through with you. I mean, Kathleen's complained about it a good deal. Julian talked about it, and Michelle talked about it, and I've told you that I sometimes experience it, that, you're polite, you do the right thing, but it's sort of like, hey, is anybody home really,
Right.
And the way you talked about your family seems similar, that, I mean, from the first time we talked about Diane, I could picture her. It's like the juice was there, and
Right.
she came alive.
Right.
But in the several conversations we've had about your mother and your father, I never really can picture them. It's a sign of real progress that David is able to hear these things from me, but he's so passive and shut down about his history that I'm not able to get any traction with him. And I mean, maybe some part of your attraction to Diane was an attraction to.
Right. I'm not sure how to answer that. I'm not sure how I feel about it. I just I remember my childhood as a a happy, pleasant childhood. I was very well provided for.
That's what you always said, and everything. I mean, it's really like as many times as we've been over this. Perhaps we both left awkwardly here because of the uselessness of my confrontation. I was seeking a way to get past his pat answers. Perhaps a better way would have been to join with him and say something like, can we together look behind that happy childhood?
I don't. It's hard for me to remember. I mean,
who's around now that you could ask? No, let's see. Your aunt. Oh yeah, your mother's. When a person is stuck like this, I find it useful to get new information from other family members instead of just pressing him to try to push his way through his block. Every year. Aunt Nell?
Well, I don't know quite that. See, I haven't seen her for many years. In fact, I think the last time I saw her was at my mother's funeral.
Really?
And we just, I mean, we were never really close.
But I mean, come on, now she was your mother's twin sister.
I know, but I'm not sure that they were close. I just don't remember that. I certainly wasn't close to her. And I just think that at this late day, it just would be pressing the issue to make contact with her.
Really? See, here's the thing. You've made good efforts,
Right.
but still I get the feeling that there's a kind of a stuckness about this that, I mean, I think men in our society are raised in a way to be, to a certain degree, shut down. So I think it's also a gender issue. But beyond that, because I think you're very well intentioned that you have been trying here, there's something that's keeping you from getting in touch with yourself.
The thing is, Monica, I have no idea of her state of mind on this at all. I mean, I don't know if she wants me there.
Mhm.
I don't know whether she's even mentally all there at
Mhm.
this point.
Well, you know, I don't know either. And that's possible that she'll just act like, you know, sort of who are you and why did you come?
Mhm.
But I kind of doubt that. You know, and I even think it's very possible that it's maybe just a hole in her heart that she doesn't have any contact with you because she has no children other than you. You know, I mean, it's possible you try.
Well,
It's possible.
I'll call and see what happens.
Okay. Although he said he'd call, I had my doubts, and weeks went by with no movement. When Kathleen began to express frustration about David's resistance, I shifted our focus to the cut-off relationships in her own family with her mother, brother, and stepfather, and she began to work on them. While the spotlight was on Kathleen, David quietly went to see his Aunt Nell. So, it took you 3 months, but you finally got to see Aunt Nell, eh?
Yes, I finally saw her, and it was absolutely amazing.
Really?
Yeah, I came back with this photo album, family photo album,
Really?
and also my mother's diaries we
Oh
found.
my God.
And I got to tell you,
Okay.
it was
You
was
knew
not
about
easy
that?
getting
Did
these
you know
things.
your mother?
Yeah, I knew she had them.
After experiencing David's flatness for so long, it was wonderful to see him so energized.
You know, she'd smile, she'd just sort of shrug her shoulders, and then she'd just, offer me some more iced tea.
Mhm.
But the thing is, like every other member of my family, she's very polite. So she really couldn't refuse me when I asked, to see these diaries and the photo album. So anyway, I got them.
Wow. So what's in them?
Well, the thing that's really amazing is, and it took a little bit of detective work, see, because my mother's writing style is very indirect. She sort of beats around the bush. And so really, I sort of perceived this more from indirection from what she didn't say than what she said. But it appeared to me that my mother actually had an affair with my father's best friend. See, my parents had these two friends, Bob and Sarah, and they were like, they did everything together. They practically went out every Saturday night to the club. They were members of this golf club. They golfed together. We went on a couple of vacations together. They had a son who was about my age. We were very close too. Anyway, we did all these things together. And in these diaries, up until, I don't know, I can't remember, June, July of like 1956, over and over again, there are things in the diary about, Bob and Sarah. We did this with Bob and Sarah, that with Bob and Sarah, so forth. And then all of a sudden, it sort of just stops. But at the same time, what I saw in the diary were these mysterious entries where my mother would say things like, I met B today. I shouldn't be doing this with B, and so forth. And at first, I was kind of mystified. And then it hit me. I remembered that when I was a kid, around the time, I was going over to their son's house all the time. We played together all the time. And all of a sudden, I wasn't allowed to go over there. And he wasn't allowed to come to our place. And my parents, like, they never mentioned him, ever again. And it was such a strange thing, as a kid to experience this, because I thought there is something strange going on here, but I don't know what it is. And nobody's talking.
Wow. Didn't you say that your mother had a couple of miscarriages just around that? I mean, didn't you say that was around that same? You were 8 or
What do you think
9?
was the connection?
I don't know. But it is a common thing for people to have affairs and to fall in love in the wake of a loss, you know, that maybe it sort of reminds you that you're alive. I mean, I don't know, but the timing seems striking to me. I don't know. What do you think?
I think it's possible. I don't know. Just don't know. But the thing that I kept coming back to is I never really had much, feeling for my father. And, he was kind of, well, he was this cold guy. And actually, I had like two simultaneous feelings. On the one hand, I felt kind of, I actually felt sort of like compassion for myself as a little boy. You know what I mean? I mean, can you imagine living in a house where no one is expressing their feelings or anything like that? And well, the other thing,
What were you going to say?
well, in a funny way, I feel sorry for him now because I think this, he did not have a lot of friends. He had, well, as a matter of fact, Bob may have been his only real friend. And all of a sudden, he's having an affair with my mother. And I think that must have been really hard for my father. And in a way, it sort of explains how he, drank himself to death. Which, is the other thing. I think, you may have been right. You may have been an alcoholic.
What do you think about that?
Well, it's very sad. Firstly, and I just want to make sure that that doesn't happen. I mean, I'm not going to become an alcoholic, but I want to make sure that when my kids look back on me, I want to make sure it's not, first of all, through many, many more years of therapy, and that they can look at me, and not think, gee, what a sad, figure my father was.
4 sessions later, the family and I felt that things were going well for all of them and that we would stop meeting for a while. I suggested that we review the therapy to date and then look toward the future.
I think for me, the hardest problem was to see that the difficulties that we were having and what brought us to you in the first place were not all of Michelle's making, but that to a very large degree, they were my problems. And obviously I didn't see that at all when I came in here. So that's what I said.
Not an easy thing for a man, especially to say.
Not easy to admit.
Way to go, Dad. No, I see that as a great strength to be able also to acknowledge your vulnerabilities, Good. How about you?
Well, I was sitting here thinking back, that there was someone I actually think I hated you. I hated you too, and you too. I think I was just going to take Jade and maybe leave.
The moment I thought you probably hated me the most was the day when I told you that if it was okay with you, I wanted to meet with Julian, Michelle, and David without you. Was I right?
Yeah, that was terrible.
How about you?
How about me? Hardest thing? Just talking about my mom's death, talking about my grandmother's dad. That's, kind of hard. Still is.
And that's because it's hard. It is hard. So now, what about things down the road? Because, therapy is just hopefully a very small part of a very large story or a set of stories. What may happen where you might get stuck that you need to be prepared for? I think it's a good idea to help people anticipate problems down the road so that they're not caught off guard if things do go wrong.
And I know for me, when school's out, I'll say, yeah, we'll have English teacher will give us a summer reading lesson. I'll say, yeah, I'll read them all. But if there's no teacher there to say, read your books, I'll start page 1. Some good TV show will come up, and then I'll put it down. So maybe I'm kind of afraid that something like that'll happen too.
Well, now, supposing that happens, would you feel okay about saying, okay, let's go back and see Monica?
You think so?
Yeah, that's good.
Oh, Monica, by the way, I forgot to tell you, we're going to Florida.
Oh, you're kidding.
Yes, the whole family is going, and we're going to see Matthew, and we're going to see Ethan.
Wow, that's great. That was on my wish list for you. I was going to just tell you now my wish list.
On my wish list, if you would go from Florida over to Puerto Rico, check out that part of the heritage.
I think we can do that.
Yeah.
Oh, great.
And secondly, that you would find a way to include your Aunt Nell so that your kids can meet her and hear her stories and see who she is, and they can know her.
Right. Well, that I don't think we can do. No, I'm kidding.
I knew you would say. And then that you'll become a playwright and live out your mother's dream. And that your mother's spirit is watching us. She's been watching over this whole therapy.
Well, can I go on it now?
And that's good too. That's good too.
And I'm looking at you wearing a dress.
When I met with the family 6 months later, it was clear that